Hi, I'm Kellen. I'm moderating here the second topic. I wanted to, housekeeping, I wanted to get that scribe to volunteer so that we have notes to share after we're done here. Preferably someone who didn't scribe the first session.
Thank you, Kellen.
Okay.
I did that last time, so somebody else can volunteer that.
All right, I don't want to randomly pick somebody. I'd love someone to enthusiastically volunteer. We're not looking at handwriting. You don't have to put together a PowerPoint. All we need is for you to document a couple high-level talking points.
Aileen's been kind of quiet.
Come on, group.
I get a chance to do plenty of documenting. Somebody else can do this.
Okay,
And Randy ought to be jumping out of his skin. He hasn't said a word.
Is Randy volunteering?
No. I will leave that for other people. I'm sure there's able and capable people.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, let's get in it. We're recording the session, and who is let me go. I'm just gonna do like a random mouse. Randy McCourt.
That would be me. So you would like me to take notes?
I would just like for you to take notes, provide a couple of bullet points on the group's behalf when we get together. That's all. Okay. Thanks, Randy.
Yeah, consider it.
All right, let's get started. So we're talking about recruiting, and I think recruiting and retention go hand in hand. And what I said in the last session, I'll say in this session, and I wanted to start with this main point, and that is, it's important as a leader of talent acquisition at my organization, I'm consistently thinking, how do I recruit people at RSNH, right? And then, of course, I'm selfishly wanting everybody that's at RSNH to stay too. But I also recognize from an industry standpoint, it's important to have a focus on how do I entice people to even enter into the fields that I'm going to need to recruit. And then secondly, how do we make sure that people aren't leaving and making it harder for all of us, right? When I think, I shared a story, when I think about one of the most challenging positions to fill, it's a PE with 10 years of experience, because 10 years ago, all of those, not all, but a lot of the engineers had no jobs. They left the industry, they left their field, and their career paths were shattered because of the recession. Fast forward now, they're harder to find because they would, if they had a job back then, they would have those 10, 15 years of experience now. And so how do we stop that from happening again? How do we make sure, one, we are enticing people at the middle school, high school, college level into our industry? And then second, how do we make sure that we are doing what we can to keep people? So I'll start that heavy question, and hopefully we'll get some good dialogue from there.
I don't have a comment about the enticing them, but one of the things we do to try to retain staff, and the great resignation, quite frankly, has hit my firm probably as hard as anybody's. We've lost 25% of our staff this year. 4 people in 3 months, which tells you how small my staff is. But it's been just brutal. But one of the things we do to try to keep everybody engaged and as part of the firm is every year we hold what we call a roundtable meeting and invite all the non-senior management staff. So the senior managers are excluded from this, but everybody else gets together, and in it, we give them an opportunity to float ideas and ask questions and, gripe about things a little bit if that's what they want to do. But out of those meetings, we've had a lot of changes to how we operate the company. We've changed our vacation program, for instance, so that they start accruing vacation sooner. We've added a holiday. We've made 2 of them floating holidays instead of all fixed holidays. So there have been a number of different things that have come out of those meetings that give the employees a sense of running the company, that they are actually given some authority and some responsibility for being part of how the company's run. And it's been, I mean, it's easy enough to do with a company of 24 people, but it is that's a lot more difficult. But others have talked about kind of breakout groups or smaller groups, but it's something that can be done on a smaller scale, but certainly to get feedback to senior management about what's important to staff. And I will readily admit to having absolutely no clue how to handle millennials. It's, and this has helped tremendously to figure out what's important to them. In the initial session, she talked about how we've gone from everybody wanting higher pay. Now they want more time off, more flexibility, more time with their families, whatever those things are. And, this is something that we're trying to figure out. How do you make that happen and still get the job done and still have a profitable company? And, so anyway, that's kind of what we've been doing that we find has led to some degree of happiness. Obviously not enough, but that's my idea.
Yeah, no, thank you. Appreciate sharing. Any other thoughts along those lines?
I kind of agree with Darlene. I have a small company too. We have about 45 people. But I think it's the millennials, the same thing. They want more time off, but sorry, I'm starting. But last year, the pandemic, we were lucky enough to really engage them virtually, but also providing with bonuses. I think they saw the value. We given 2 bonuses, one in the summer, one in the end of the year. And some staff we provided salary increases too, because we want to make sure they stay here. We know there's going to be more demands after the post-pandemic, so we want to make sure that they're part of the company, part of the team, but also we try to engage more of the group scenario as Darlene does in her company too. You got to engage, especially the mid-level engineers. They're hard to find. They're not out there, and everyone wants to take your staff away from you too.
Appreciate that. From a recruiting standpoint, Carlos, is that something that you've been advertising? Are you actively pursuing individuals to join your team and using that?
Yeah, we changed our flyers, our advertising like 5 different times. We're looking really for mid-level engineers, planners, ITS, but they're not out there. It's hard. Also, the DOT, Caltrans here in California, even the starting salary for new grads, I believe they're paying like $75K. So it's hard so as a consultant, the staff that have been working for us 2 years, we got to make sure we kind of increase their salary as well. So they see, because they talk, the millennials do talk. They talk every week how much they're getting paid every paycheck. It's not like our generation, we never talk about that.
Yeah, that's one of the beauties and potential penalties of transparency. I personally am a fan of transparency, but I do know what transparency does sometimes as well. I mean, and you see, like in Colorado, for example, there are states now that are requiring transparency when it comes to pay. Information can be found a whole lot faster. And you're right, Carlos, people are talking. And the questions that we're getting, and I'm not even talking about millennials, now we're in the next generation. The questions that we are getting are, the people are just so in tune and are so refined. College students asking very detailed questions of what they're getting, what this means and how it works, which is good. But then it's also exposing areas of opportunity as well when they're asking questions that you're not expecting that they would even be concerned about. You're just like, oh, wow, I didn't know that we were competing on this front. You assume benefits are kind of here and there everywhere, but now there's an expectation of what it means if I'm getting benefits. What does it mean if I don't want your benefits? Am I incentivized not to take? I mean, thinking like that, where a few years ago we didn't have to think that way. I wanted to pivot. We had a conversation the last session. I thought it was really good. We talked about the future, and we have current needs, or at least my organization, we have current needs. We talked about, Michelle said the unicorn. Seems like we're all looking for the unicorn, right? We have backlog, we have clients we need to service, all of that is before us. But what about the future? What are some of the types of people that we were thinking we're going to need to go after that we don't even have currently? So what are some of those? I wrote it down in the last session, but I don't want to bait anybody. What are some of the roles that we feel that are going to be futuristic hires for us?
I'll start again. Diversity, I think, is a key part to be more diverse in our culture. And I'm glad about. I think some of the good things about the COVID. I think these virtual meetings, and I start seeing a lot of our younger ladies before in my previous companies. They didn't allow working part time because they got married and had built a family. Now we can't because we have to live in the virtual world. I think that's going to will bring us more diversity in our industry to allow that.
One of the things we're looking for is you talked about that 10-year, the unicorn, that's going to leave a gap in our leadership at our companies. I mean, we're looking at, I'm 65. I will be 66 in January. So I'm past retirement age and I'm still working for a few more years because there's no one to take over. I've got some 50 somethings that they'll come along, and then there's this big hole between them and the 30 somethings. And so I think that's, you talked about unicorn, but that's what we're looking for, somebody to fill that gap in the leadership of our companies, as those of us who are, approaching or past retirement age, actually leave and walk out the door. We've got to have somebody to take over our companies, and then someone to take over from them. It's not so much, I've got somebody to take over from me, but it's the next step down that we're already worried about. How do we do this? Michael's young enough that he'll be there a while, but I see some other gray hairs on here like me who
don't be so sure.
are a little closer to that exit.
Yeah, don't be so sure. I think one thing is to Daylene's point about that gap, and I think it's a structural gap in the industry. It's not anyone. When I talk to people like all of you and other peers in the industry, there's a gap there, many of us, have, and those who've come forth had this expectation that you had to pay your dues for a certain period of time before you could step into those leadership roles. And I think we're having very pointed conversations in our organizations that we just need to get over that. Like, we're going to have to give younger people more leadership opportunities sooner. And sometimes that makes us uncomfortable. Like, oh my God, what happens if they stumble and fail at something? And they're like, yep, that might happen. And we need to be there to help them through that. But I think we need to get over that. And so we're very much looking at a younger group of leaders than we've had previously. And I think that's what our future workforce is going to look like. And frankly, they're craving the opportunity. And so we're trying to figure out how we do that. How do we support them, train them, make sure they're mostly ready? And then we're going to throw them into the deep end.
And Michael, I agree with you. In California, so some of the public agencies the traffic engineers are 20-something, 30-something these days because they cannot fulfill those positions anymore. So we have to in the private consultant side too.
So I can echo the same point, from our organization. We recognize as we came out of the Great Recession, well, now we're missing those 2 to 3 year old group. Now we're missing the 4 to 5. And that is going to work itself all the way through as time goes on. So we intentionally knew the more senior folks had to do more aggressive education, training, leadership to younger staff than they had been accustomed to. So it is, education, training, task management roles at a earlier, maybe less comfortable stage. And, I can give task management to somebody just right out of college or so on to do simple mitigation letters. But if they blow that by 100%, it costs us $1,000 of overrun versus giving that responsibility to somebody with, you know, $100,000 project under their responsibility. But giving them that taste of leadership early. To pivot a little bit, I think, you know, our future is non-traditional engineering backgrounds. The skill sets we're going to see are going to come from younger folks that did not think engineering was the direction, but they have the skills that's going to be what we need. So us being open to look into different areas of education, and of course, starting out early of what we have with STEM and introducing the technical, you know, our engineering skill sets earlier in the grammar school, mid-level, high school. You know, how do we get high school interns doing AutoCAD? All those things that allow us to internships that feed into our profession overall. And I think there's always a general idea that engineering, we don't have enough engineers in the world to begin with. And then when he slices that we don't have enough transportation engineers, and how and do we bring folks into our discipline to do the services we do?
I think this morning when she talked about the like demonstrating the values of transportation to society was kind of something that like resonated with me, because I kind of got into transportation by accident. I went to Northeastern, I'm in Boston, and we had the co-op program. So you worked while you were in school, and my co-op was in January, and they were like, do you want to do construction or work in an office? And I was like, office. And that's how I got into transportation, really. And so it's, I think it's on all of us to kind of get those conversations going. And I think what's interesting now with social media, and there's the good and bad side, but there's actually a high school student in a community outside of Boston that critiques on Twitter our transportation infrastructure, and he bikes every day to his high school, and he has really changed the way that I've thought about it, and kind of, I hope that he continues to be interested in transportation and advances and becomes an aspect of, participates in our industry. But there's different tools that we can reach people at, that we need to kind of recognize and utilize.
No, I appreciate
it. And just one more thought, Kellen. I'll add to that, add to what Michelle said. I think, that's very important. It's whatever we as professionals, I feel whatever opportunities we get to participate in our local middle schools and high schools, and even sometimes people just think, oh, transportation engineering, civil engineering, they're not going to understand that, but sometimes it's even simple things. I mean, like I've gone to my middle school in my school district and talked about how we use writing in our profession. But that's exposed them to certain aspects of what we do, laying it out in a very simple way. But the other point I wanted to make is, whether it's IT or any professional organization, I think we are in a unique position, and we tried to do this, I would say, locally in the Met section of New York, New Jersey, build those relationships and connections with the local schools and colleges, and try to, I don't want to use the word influence, but build relationships with teachers such that you can have a peer exchange and share what's happening in the industry, so that gets transferred in schools and colleges as well. That could be part of local curriculums. I think again, we're not educators. I mean, they're there, they're doing a great job, but we as professionals can have better interaction with them, so that gets transferred, and that might build interest as we go along. And then, of course, in the consulting world, try to, like Michelle, you mentioned your high school student. I mean, we actually do connect with several high schools, and start talking to students at that age, so that builds your interest, and sometimes that helps us get interns while they are in undergrad.
A couple thoughts that come to my mind as I'm thinking about staffing for the future. recognizing there aren't enough engineers to go around, and they're not going to be. And so we need to think different about how we staff our teams. One of those things that we're starting to do, I think we kind of fell into it accidentally, but I think we'll do more of it, is some of our engineers who are great engineers are not particularly good managers or project managers. And so, you know, project management is a skill set that isn't necessarily the same as engineering. And so we've now have a guy working for us who's managing significant projects that are mostly engineering projects, who's not an engineer. He comes with an organizational, you know, management. He's got got experience in the industry, but he's one of our best project managers. Communicates well, very organized, you know, great at keeping things on track. And I think as we look to needing more of those types of people, that we may need to look outside of the discipline of engineering to find those people, and that's okay. The other thing that I think goes along with that to some extent is if you have a young person who has the skills, the communication skills and the organizational skills to be a good manager, that doesn't need to be the most senior person in the group. I think historically it's like the most senior person, the highest paid person is the manager. But those skill sets are different. And so I think this idea that you could tag someone who has all the tools to be a good manager or a good project manager, and they may very well have somebody on their team who's making far more money than them because they're the most senior technical person on the team. But this mindset that kind of the most senior, highest paid person has to be the manager, I think is also a paradigm that probably needs to get blown up.
I agree, and that's one of the opportunities that we have is not only, but in our organization, we're looking at our compensation structure. Sometimes people go for roles simply because that's their financial path, right? So they say, oh, if I become a PM, then I'm going to make more money. If I stay where I'm at, I won't. And if you are blowing that up and allowing for people to be incentivized to be their best selves without having to squeeze into a role because that's the only way you're going to get a 10% pay bump. Otherwise, you're going to get your equity, you know, your 3%, and that's it. So if we are allowing someone to say, you know what, I don't want people leadership, but I still want to be the best of what I'm doing and growing, giving them that financial incentive to stay on that path, vice versa, of having someone who's raising their hand for leadership, giving them the financial incentives and the tools that go along with that as well. We have like 1 minute. I wanted to open the floor. Lasting statements about staffing for the future, how we can fill our openings. Yeah, absolutely. Somebody asked for my email address and I'll give it to you if you're interested.
I just throw one last thing out there. We recently made an offer to somebody and we rewrote our offer letter to include things like flexibility and you know, work hours and some of that stuff that is more important to the millennials that we hadn't felt like we had to emphasize before. But you know, we are making that a point now because it's something that's important to them.
I really appreciate that. Great lasting words. We'll see each other in the big session.